Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Putting the Story in History. And I want to apologize for that glare behind me, but what can you do? Anyway, it's been a while since we've had a Putting the Story in History video, but today I wanted to talk about something that's happened not recently anymore, but back last year in 2021 in August when the United States left Afghanistan for the first time since 20 years ago when we invaded after 9/11. The war was the longest conflict that the United States has ever actually been in, and it's really kind of changed our policy and focus internationally and domestically. So I figured it was worth talking about at least a little bit since it's been such an influence on modern American life. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, Afghanistan. And so we're going to talk about kind of the history of Afghanistan, how we got involved, and then what happens now. So let's get started with the history. Afghanistan, for the majority of its history, has been a part of several different empires, whether that be Persia or the Macedonian Empire or the Arab Empire, the Ottoman Empire, right? All these different empires have had influence or control over Afghanistan for the majority of its history. However, starting in about the 1800s, the British started to exercise some sort of control, or wanted to at least, can have some sort of control over Afghanistan. And this is mostly because the Ottoman Empire was weakening, couldn't really hold on to its most outward possessions, and also Afghanistan has oil in it, which England really wanted. So in that time period is when the people of Afghanistan fought several conflicts with the English who were trying to colonize them, basically. And in the end of all this, it became a British protected state, which means basically that, like, it wasn't officially a colony, but it basically was. England was protecting that territory with its military, and even though it had self-governance, Britain basically was in charge of that land. Eventually, however, right, Afghanistan did become its own country, and this was after the World Wars. It had several different internal conflicts during that time. But the next major international interference with Afghanistan was in 1979 when the Soviet Union invaded the country because they were trying to eliminate an anti-Soviet leader and prop up the former Soviet regime. The Soviets ended up taking a lot of casualties. Afghanistan fought with a lot of guerrilla fighters, and these civilian militia and warlords at that point had kind of become the norm in Afghanistan. And of course, America and other countries that were against the Soviet Union were funding and arming these warlords to resist the Soviets. So they were getting funds from other countries also trying to influence Afghanistan, right? So Afghanistan is under this influence of all these other countries. So in 1994, the Taliban rose to power due to a civil war and strife between the warlords. The Taliban is this group that was able to basically win out a civil war of warlords. And they were able to do this mostly just because they had the most weapons, the most supplies. They were able to win out over the rest of these groups. And the Taliban were known specifically for brutally treating civilians, especially women, and just generally not being great human rights wise. They also became shelters for terrorist groups and training camps. So they were courting favor with these terrorist groups that wanted a place to hide out. They were having a hard time hanging out in places like Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Iran, all these other countries that didn't really want terrorist groups training and living in their territory. But the Taliban were like, yeah, you want to come hang out here? Come on over. So all these different groups basically were headquartered in Afghanistan under the Taliban. And they were basically supporting them financially and giving them land and areas to train and helping them recruit. Which is what's going to end up having them run into the United States. So, of course, in 2001, 9/11 happens. Al-Qaeda, which is a terrorist group founded by Osama bin Laden, a Saudi national who had been living in Afghanistan and training his men, flew two planes into the Twin Towers in New York, one into the Pentagon, and then there was one that didn't make it to its target, but we're pretty sure it was heading towards Congress, or the White House, probably Congress though. And so this group, right, is trying to destroy the West, which mainly in this context is the United States, and right was given this refuge in Afghanistan by the Taliban. So after 9/11 happens, right, the United States realizes really quickly where these people came from, what they were doing, why they were doing it, and so President Bush and several of his NATO allies led an invasion of Afghanistan, and over the course of several days, absolutely bombed the heck out of the country, overran it on the ground, and toppled the Taliban. So the Taliban overthrown really easily. Al-Qaeda on the run. They don't want to be captured, right, by the Westerners, so they're on the run. And so after that, now we're in this point where America basically has occupied a foreign nation, and so they want to try to set the goal, I guess, was to set Afghanistan up to be a modern liberal democracy. And so they're trying to rebuild this country as a democracy model at the U.S. with a very similar government structure, very similar institutions and norms. But I think what the United States didn't really think about was that they're in a country with entirely different cultural norms and political expectations than the United States. And so this sort of model for democracy wasn't exactly going to work. Afghanistan's a very diverse place. It's got a lot of different ethnic groups. It just isn't exactly the place for this kind of democratic model. Regardless, that's what happened. Trillions and trillions of dollars spent occupying Afghanistan and trying to train their defense force by the United States. So we're pouring money into this country, trying to prepare them to govern themselves. And there are a lot of roadblocks and issues with that. We were fighting insurgents, other terrorist groups trying to take over Afghanistan. People just generally didn't want America there, right? There's all sorts of issues with that going on, right? So this entire time that we're there, we're constantly kind of checking over our shoulders. We're getting attacked by militants and insurgents and whoever you could think of, basically just people who wanted America out of their homeland. And so all of this happened over the course of 20 years. That gets us all the way till now. In 2020, President Trump basically said, we're done doing this. We're leaving Afghanistan. So he made a deal. He said, we're going to retreat. We're leaving in 2020. We're getting out of here. While he's doing that, President Trump also released Taliban prisoners that were in Pakistan. So he negotiated with the Pakistani government to have the leaders of the Taliban released from Pakistani prisons. Trump's agreement was to have them leave in August of 2021. That's what ended up happening. And when President Biden came into office, he decided to honor Trump's agreement, right? Because as an American, right, kind of with the honor of that, as we made this deal, we're going to stick with it. But this retreat ended up being hasty and mismanaged, mostly because he was trying to extend this stay. He wanted to make sure that he could continue this for a little bit longer so we could get more stuff out. The issue is, while all this is happening, the Taliban, which had just been boosted by the release of their leadership, began to invade and retake Afghanistan. And so as this retreat was occurring, right, there's, images of the Taliban swooping through Afghanistan, soldiers leaving stuff behind, people trying to get out of the country. Just didn't look really good. Lots of refugees now trying to get out or have gotten out and are now seeking relocation, whether in the United States or in Europe. And because of this, right, the Taliban has resurged. They have conquered all of Afghanistan as soon as the U.S. pulled out, basically minutes afterwards. They had control of the ground. The Afghan Defense Force surrendered immediately. They didn't even fight back. And now the Taliban control the whole country. And we haven't actually been hearing a lot about this since then. It was a really big news story, obviously, in August and September. But now that it's January, February, we haven't been hearing about it that much. And that's basically because the Taliban controls what we're hearing. There aren't really foreign journalists walking around Afghanistan anymore. And that's because it's dangerous. It's not exactly a safe place to be. But what we do know so far, from what we've learned, is that although they've talked a big game of being better about treating people equally and having a more, I guess, civil government, the Taliban has definitely been cracking down on women's rights. Girls are afraid to leave their homes. And we can only imagine what's been happening. We don't really know. We don't have people there observing. So, yeah, it's kind of a mess. And unfortunately, for us American folk, it's our mess. We created this problem. And even if you say it's like, well, 9/11 happened and they were helping Al Qaeda or whatever. I'm like, yeah, they were, but then to follow that up, we destabilized their nation, destroyed their government, destroyed their institutions, and then after 20 years of kind of sort of helping, we just left. So now we've left this country in the lurch, millions of people in danger, and the possibility of this power vacuum and more chaos in this region. So if anything, we left the area worse off than we found it. So it's something for us to think about, especially us people who are maybe more patriotic in that sense than they are morally nice. I mean, like, think about it. Like, yeah, sure, like, America did what it needed to do to be America, but, like, this kind of human and political bill is pretty hard to swallow, especially for a country that claims to be so great at what it does. So, what's going to happen now? Well, as of right now, the United States isn't really going to be doing anything in Afghanistan, and most other Western countries are leaving it alone too. These people are kind of been left out on their own. So what's going to happen? Well, there's tons of other powers in the Middle East that could definitely intervene. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and other ones that have Israel, who have the strength in the region to do something about this. What's going to happen? Only time's going to tell. But anyway, regardless, what we do know is that Afghanistan is a mess, and America has a lot to answer for it. Thank you guys for watching Putting the Story in History, and I hope this quick rundown of the history of Afghanistan and that conflict was helpful for you, if that's something that you're interested in learning about. Got more awesome Putting the Story in History planned, so we'll see you later for some more awesome history. Adios.